Welcome, brothers, sisters, fellow travelers. My name is Joel and this is Good Crazy. If Christianity is going to be the restful, refreshing, easy thing that Jesus intended it to be, then one thing that really helps us to grasp that is a better understanding of sin. Because, especially if you've been raised in the churches, sin is a very powerful topic that usually makes people feel bad about themselves and feel separated from God. But Jesus, well, he was known by his opponents for eating and drinking with sinners, according to them, right? Prostitutes and tax collectors. In other words, he socialized with these people rather than viewing them in a negative light. And so once again, Jesus turns out to be a rebel, a revolutionary in his time. And if we want to copy his example, we really need to understand sin the way he did. And the first part of that is to separate sin from the way we think God judges us. Because Jesus tells us how he judges us when he talks about a future time in which he would sit in judgment and separate the sheep from the goats. And the key difference was how they treated other people. When they saw someone thirsty or hungry or in need of clothing or shelter, what did they do? Did they pass on by? For instance, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, a similar situation takes place where there is a person who's been robbed and beaten and lying on the side of the road, and a priest and a Levite just walk on by instead of stopping to help. But the Good Samaritan, that's what makes him good, right? Is that he chooses to act to help another person. And so it had less to do with the traditional concept of sin, right? When we think of like getting drunk or having sex with someone you're not married to. These are the traditional ideas that the church has about sin. Jesus points out it's how we treat other people that makes a difference in the eyes of God. And when it comes to sin, he makes a very interesting point when talking to the Pharisees at the time that he cured this man who had been born blind. He said, "For judgment I have come into this world, that those who are blind might see, and that those who see would be blind." And the Pharisees retort, you're not saying we're blind too, are you? And he says, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But because you claim you see, your sin remains. What a powerful thing to say. Jesus hadn't died yet on the cross, and the traditional idea that the church has about Jesus is that he, by dying, redeemed us. He, in his death, redeemed us of our sins. But even before that took place, Jesus is saying, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. And to explain that a little better, I think when we think of children, right, they might steal another child's toy, or they might punch another child in the shoulder because they're angry. And it's not that that behavior is good behavior, but we can understand that they're very young, right? And they don't necessarily know better. They haven't learned how to play well with others yet. And we tend to give them a pass, even if we might still correct or try to correct that behavior. And so it is with God, that he knows that we are blind and we are children in his eyes. The eternal one, for us, no matter how long you've lived, it's very little time. So he understands our full history. He understands who we are better than we do, and he does not consider us guilty unless, right, we start thinking what we're doing is actually right. And there's the key difference. For instance, just to take that illustration further, if you at night had the power go out in your house and you can't see, how are you going to react? Right? Whatever your next move is, you're probably going to do it cautiously, right? Because you know you can't see. You move carefully with intention, knowing that if you aren't careful, you could hurt yourself or hurt others. But imagine someone who refuses to accept that they can't see, and they continue to move as quickly as they would if the lights were on. They would be a danger to themselves and to others. And there is the key difference. And it is displayed over and over again in the difference between the way the Pharisees and other opponents of Jesus acted and the way the so-called sinners with whom he associated acted. Because he said, the prostitutes and the tax collectors are going ahead of you into the kingdom, right? These people to them were sinners. The idea that they would be going into the kingdom ahead of them would be hard for them to understand. But we see that in one of the parables that Jesus gives about a Pharisee and a tax collector going to pray in the temple. And the Pharisee says to God, I thank you that I am not like other men, including this guy, this tax collector over here. And the tax collector is filled with humility, right? And approaches God differently, realizing that he makes mistakes. And so the difference between one and the other is that one person believes himself to be righteous, and the other person knows that he makes mistakes. And the same plays out when Jesus is in the house of Simon the Pharisee, where a woman approaches Jesus and is kissing his feet and crying over his feet and washing his feet with her hair. And the Pharisee thinks within himself, if he knew what kind of woman was touching him, right? He thinks of this woman as being lesser than, right? A sinner. And Jesus does not view her in that way. And for this reason, Jesus, when he calls out the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 23, right, he's talking about them giving a tenth of their spices. They're so careful to tithe appropriately. But he says, you pass over the more important things like justice and mercy and faithfulness. And he says they strain the gnat and gulp down the camel. And that's the danger of viewing sin in the way that it is commonly viewed in the churches. Because if you believe that you aren't committing sins, well, then you start to think of yourself as righteous. But when you realize what sin really is, you know we all commit sins. We all make mistakes. The word sin in Greek comes from this idea of missing the mark. Like, so if you're shooting an arrow at a target, the bullseye would be the goal. Anything outside of that would be missing the mark, you could say. So what is the mark? Because the way it's presented in the churches is it is as if the mark is righteousness. But the mark really is love, right? It's the example that Jesus set, that he was always loving, that he forgave even the people who were in the act of murdering him. And so all of us at one time or another have been unloving, and we may in the future also be unloving. But the key difference is recognizing that we do make those mistakes sometimes versus thinking, well, I've checked off all the boxes. I am married. I haven't committed adultery. I haven't murdered anyone. I haven't stolen. So I guess I'm righteous. No, even you, even I, we make these mistakes of being unloving to people. It could be in traffic. It could be in normal interactions where we aren't even aware that we hurt someone else's feelings because of some of the words that we might have said. But when we recognize that we make mistakes and we follow Jesus' example, right? Peter asked Jesus, right, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? 7 times? And he probably thought that was a lot. But Jesus, using hyperbole, right, says, no, I tell you, up to 77 times. So really, the key is not to berate ourselves, beat ourselves up for the mistakes we make. We know that God sees us as children who are blind, who make mistakes. But are we learning from those mistakes? Are we getting better with age? Because just like I mentioned earlier, children who might steal a toy from another child, they're very young. They haven't had a lot of experience. With time, you would hope people learn from their mistakes. When they hurt someone else's feelings and that person points it out, they ask forgiveness and they try to improve their behavior. Are we learning with time? It doesn't mean we're going to not make mistakes in the future, but those mistakes are for us to learn from. And that's the key difference. And so when it comes to Christianity and the weight that we might feel, if we realize that just like Jesus loved no matter what, even when Peter denied him 3 times after spending so much time with him, he forgave him. And Peter, no doubt, felt shocked by that. But that is how we should be, someone who continuously forgives. And when you are that way, it lightens your load. Imagine when somebody hurts your feelings, right? You might allow your heart to shut down, to close toward that person. It's an understandable feeling. Be like, nope, you're not going to hurt me again. I'm going to close down my heart. I'm not going to have anything to do with you. But if you instead learn to keep your heart open, to see that person as well is in the darkness, they are blind. They're making mistakes. Maybe one day they'll learn from those mistakes. But I am going to continue to love that person no matter what. And if we do that, then all of a sudden Christianity becomes something that is easy to carry because we don't judge ourselves for making mistakes and we don't judge others. We forgive freely. And it feels so good, honestly, to liberate yourself from that perspective of sin, to see that God expects us walking around in the dark to make mistakes, but he hopes and believes in us that we will grow from those mistakes and that we will treat others the way we would like to be treated, which is to be given a second chance, a third chance, and so on, so that we, and by the end of our lives, have made more progress. So like I've been saying, Christianity is supposed to be easy, and it really is. If we learn to have a different concept of sin than what's taught in the churches, and we know that we're going to make mistakes, we're going to do unloving things, but we should learn from them and forgive ourselves, and similarly forgive others for the mistakes they made, because they too are in darkness. And then it becomes so much easier to live a life like Christ. Until next time, may you know love, may you have peace, and may the truth set you free.